It's Thursday, June 26th, and it's 4:20 somewhere in the world. I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville. Produced and distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C., this is your NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome to the most popular podcast regarding marijuana in all of America and all the world, featuring interviews with scientists, politicians, doctors, prohibition policy activists, regular cannabis consumers, musicians, and NORML staff and NORML's board of directors, along with music and comedy no other podcast can offer. You can always find out more about our show at our website, stash.norml.org, and continue the education and conversation on our blog as well. We're ending marijuana prohibition with education, one listener at a time. The podcasting and blogging technology for the NORML Daily Audio Stash is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. For your professional web design needs, visit redaphid.com. Hey Stashers, welcome to another wonderful Thursday. Glad to have you here. I'm on my way to the Oregon coast, like I mentioned yesterday, for the family reunion. And speaking of family, today, June 26th, is my parents' 42nd wedding anniversary. Dad's sitting behind me listening in on the recording of the show. So happy anniversary to my parents, 42 years together. Now, on today's Audio Stash, we're going to be talking about guns, and particularly the rights of medical marijuana patients, whether or not they have the right to keep and bear arms. This is a case that comes out of my home state of Oregon, where 3 medical marijuana patients were denied the right to have a concealed weapons permit by the county sheriff. So we'll be speaking with NORML Legal Committee member Lee Berger, the attorney who defended the people in those cases and managed to re-secure their Second Amendment rights. Also, we've got our regular hemp headlines and our musical break, and we have a winner in our Pass the Stash contest. We'll be getting to that in just a moment, right after the headlines. All right, everybody, sit back and relax, grab yourself some train wreck, and enjoy, because this is your NORML Daily Audio Stash. Now it's time to take a look at the latest stories about marijuana from news organizations across America and around the world in our NORML Daily Audio Stash, Hemp Headlines. Report clears the air on European marijuana use, from Deutsche Welle. Cannabis is the drug of choice in Europe, with 13 million people lighting up each month. A new report by Europe's drug agency, EMCDDA, aims to debunk misconceptions that persist about the drug. 20% of European adults have tried cannabis at some point in their lives, according to a mammoth 700-page report by the EU's European Monitoring Centre for Drugs and Drug Addiction, or EMCDDA. The report examines Dutch dope selling in coffee shops, hashish smoking in London during the heady 1960s, and the state of Moroccan marijuana production. The report was released on Thursday, June 26th, and coincides with the UN's International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking. The study doesn't push for EU-wide legalization of marijuana, nor does it advocate harsher punishments. Instead, it aims to serve as an authoritative reference work on scientific research, legislation, and policy issues associated with the drug in Europe. Most European cannabis comes from Morocco, which supplies 80% of all resin seized in Europe. The report also looks at emerging supply lines from countries such as Thailand, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Central Asia. Not that all marijuana is being imported. In Britain, homegrown marijuana accounts for 50% of the market, according to the report. The report also points out the differences between legislation in European countries. Portugal decriminalized cannabis use in 2000, and Luxembourg punishes possession with a fine. Meanwhile, both Denmark and Italy have toughened laws. It also examines the cost of cannabis, which gets more expensive as one heads north. Cannabis sells for 1.4 euros or $2.20 per gram in Spain, while costing on average 21.5 euros per gram in Norway. The report also claims to debunk the belief that modern-day cannabis is much stronger now than in the past. The report said that is an urban myth based on flawed data. A 700-page report that tells the truth about cannabis without calling for harsh punishments and debunks the U.S. drug czar's not your father's Woodstock weed scare tactics? Well, happy International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking. Maybe this will help the European countries recognize that if they took the illicit out of the trafficking, they could tax the proceeds to fight the drug abuse. Georgia radio host says he's been suspended after marijuana arrest. Macon radio talk show host Shane McBride says he's been suspended indefinitely from his job at WMAC News Talk 940 pending an internal corporate investigation. McBride, 37, said he met with Cumulus Broadcasting representatives Wednesday morning after being arrested for misdemeanor marijuana possession about noon Tuesday. McBride said he was, quote, at the wrong place at the wrong time, end quote, when police knocked on the door of a Center Street residence after smelling burning marijuana on Tuesday. An officer responding to a report of a man with a gun on Center Street at about 12:15 p.m. Tuesday couldn't find the man, but the officer smelled a strong odor of marijuana coming from 982 Center Street, according to a Macon police report. The officer knocked on the door, and the homeowner agreed to a search of the residence, according to the report. 7 people inside denied having any marijuana, but when told that a drug-sniffing dog was on the way, McBride admitted having a small bag of marijuana, according to the report. Officers say another person there admitted to smoking marijuana. McBride was charged with misdemeanor possession of marijuana, while the other 6 people, including the homeowner, were cited for being present where drugs are kept, used, or sold, according to the report. Police spokeswoman Sergeant Melanie Hoffman said McBride had less than an ounce of marijuana. He was released from the Bibb County Jail late Tuesday afternoon on a $390 bond, according to jail records. Okay, Stashers, let us all learn that lesson from Shane McBride and the stupid homeowner. Repeat after me. I'm sorry, officer, I really can't let you into my home without a valid search warrant. And, officer, I do not consent to any searches. I know it can be intimidating when a cop knocks on your door, but if you've got people inside smoking pot, letting that officer in your home is a guarantee that someone is going to jail. Most likely you. You have nothing to lose by asserting your Fourth Amendment rights. Step outside your door, close it behind you, and politely tell them they cannot enter without a warrant. Your refusal to allow a warrantless search is not sufficient for the probable cause they'd need to enter without it. The smell of burning marijuana coming from your home might be enough for them to get a warrant, but that's a big pain in the ass for them, and they may not want to wake up a judge for what may be a small misdemeanor amount of marijuana. But suppose the homeowner lets the cops in, and you're holding the bag. Refuse to consent to any searches. Don't just admit to possession and make their job easy. They threaten to bring the drug dogs? Fine. If they find the weed on you, you're no more or less busted than you would have been if you voluntarily showed them your weed. Refusal to consent to a search is not going to make your charges any worse. You're not resisting arrest, you're asserting your rights. As for the radio DJ, look, if Cumulus Broadcasting wants to remove all of its employees who smoke weed, there's going to be a lot of dead air on that station. Ben Kingsley says, Mary-Kate was in charge of makeout scene. From People magazine. He's a screen legend. Heck, he's even been knighted. But Sir Ben Kingsley isn't above a little kiss and tell when it comes to his on-screen smooch with 22-year-old Mary-Kate Olsen in The Whackness. The actor, age 64, tells People, quote, she was completely in charge, end quote, of their enthusiastic makeout scene in a telephone booth. The former star of Gandhi and Schindler's List, who's currently shooting with Martin Scorsese in Boston, drove down to New York for the movie's Cinema Society and Sony Sierra-sponsored party at the Gramercy Roof Club. His wife, Daniela, said, quote, I love watching the movie, about this coming-of-age stoner film. As for her real-life leading man, she added, I love him, he's amazing. Writer-director Jonathan Levine said that although he was never a drug dealer, the film is loosely based on his own experiences growing up in New York. And even with this all-star cast, Levine still passed along a few valuable lessons. Most notably, quote, I did have to teach Sir Ben how to take a bong hit, end quote. Hey, Stashers, you're really going to love this movie. Check out my interview with the director, Jonathan Levine, from last Friday's Daily Audio Stash. I've got links to it up at the blog at stash.normal.org. Operation Southern Sweep destroys 10,000 plants in Humboldt County. From the Times Standard Online. Federal agents who served warrants on properties across Humboldt and into northern Mendocino County have begun the process of sifting through the massive amount of evidence seized during Tuesday's marijuana raids, with the plants alone worth an estimated $25 million to $60 million. Estimates produced by the FBI indicate authorities seized more than 10,000 marijuana plants, one vehicle, computers, more than $160,000 in cash, and 30 firearms, including shotguns, handguns, and fully automatic weapons. Wow, that's weird. For a minute there, I thought Americans had the right to own vehicles, computers, cash, and firearms. You'll always notice how law enforcement emphasizes the firearms netted in these marijuana raids because they need to scare the public with the unspoken assumption that somehow these marijuana growers are violent criminals. Those firearms are used in self-defense, since a marijuana grower can't exactly call the cops if thugs try to steal the marijuana. Officials stressed from the outset of the operation that Proposition 215 patients and medical marijuana dispensaries would not be targeted by the warrants. In a prepared statement released Wednesday by the FBI, Special Agent in Charge Charlene Thornton said, quote, "This is not a medical marijuana operation or a group of people growing for personal use. The targets of our investigation are reaping huge profits while contributing to the crime and violence oppressing communities across the state." End quote. No, the prohibition of marijuana is contributing to crime and violence and allowing growers to reap huge profits. And as for that promise that they weren't going after Prop 215 patients, a Sunnybrae man whose residence was the target of a warrant Tuesday said agents raided his house by mistake and confiscated about 35 marijuana plants he said he was growing under 215 regulations. The man, who would not give his name, said about 10 agents knocked on his door in the morning and showed him the warrant. He said, quote, "It was a warrant for someone who wasn't there, who I presume was connected to this commercial growing deal. The FBI stressed that they weren't there for the small 215 garden. They found them, and they said that they had to take them, and we didn't contest it." End quote. So much for that promise.
Now it's time to play Pass the Stash, where you can win cool prizes from NORML.
Ah, yes, we have a winner in our Pass the Stash contest. One of our Stash fans, who wishes to remain anonymous, correctly answered these 3 questions. Now, I did receive a few people that made multiple guesses and eventually came up with the right answer, but this one was the first email I received that got it right on the first try. Question number 1 was, which of the following 4 stoner movies made the most money at the box office? And your choices were Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, Half Baked with Dave Chappelle, Tenacious D and the Pick of Destiny, and The Big Lebowski. And the correct answer was The Big Lebowski, with $46 million in worldwide box office. Now, if we were only counting domestic box office, then Harold and Kumar win, besting The Big Lebowski's domestic gross of $17 million. However, the question only asks most money at the box office, and since they have box offices in places other than the U.S., we got to add in the international take that the dude made overseas. Now, question number 2 asked how many people were arrested for simple marijuana possession in 2006. Your possible answers were 1.9 million, 830,000, 740,000, or 610,000. And the correct answer is 740,000. It was a little bit of a trick question. A lot of people answered 830,000, and that's good, but 830,000 is how many arrests we have for all marijuana crimes. 89% of those were for simple possession alone, and that works out to about 740,000. And just for curiosity's sake, the 1.9 million that are arrested, that was for all drug crimes in 2006. And the 610,000 represents how many people are arrested for all violent crimes combined. That's right, 740,000 arrests for marijuana possession, 610,000 arrests for violent crime. And for our final question, question number 3 was, according to the Institutes of Medicine, what percentage of cannabis users eventually become clinically dependent on cannabis? Your possible answers were 31%, 15%, 9%, or trick question because nobody becomes clinically dependent on marijuana. A lot of people answered with the trick question, but it is about 9%, according to the Institutes of Medicine. It's important to note, though, that marijuana dependency is a far different condition than the addiction that comes with alcohol or tobacco. But yes, for some people, particularly those prone to mental illness and the adolescent, marijuana can be a bad lifestyle choice. It's not for everyone, but that doesn't mean that it should be illegal. So congratulations to our anonymous winner of Pass the Stash. You'll be receiving your copy of Pot Culture, the A to Z Guide to Stoner Language and Life by Shirley Halperin and Steve Bloom. And thanks for playing Pass the Stash.
Hello, I'm Paul Stanford from the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation, or THCF. Medical marijuana is legal in 12 states today, and THCF has medical clinics in 6 of those states. Our physicians help qualified patients obtain an authorization for medical marijuana in their state. Patients are eligible for medical marijuana with a history of either severe chronic pain and or nausea, cancer, AIDS or HIV, hepatitis, glaucoma, seizure disorders like epilepsy, chronic muscle spasms as in multiple sclerosis or asthma, neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, and gastrointestinal disorders like IBS or Crohn's disease. If you or someone you know has one of these conditions, our doctors will help them obtain a permit for medical marijuana. THCF Medical Clinics has offices in Washington State, Oregon, Colorado, Nevada, Hawaii, and California. Call 1-800-723-0188 or go to the web at www.hemp.org or 1-800-723-0188.
We got quite an interesting segue here for this next story. Today, the Supreme Court came down with a landmark 5-4 decision affirming the personal right to keep and bear arms as detailed in the Second Amendment. And a lot of times people don't think about how the drug war might affect their Second Amendment rights. Of course, in a lot of our punishments and mandatory minimums, there are bigger sentences handed out to people who have firearms and they also have marijuana. But one place where it hasn't been noticed so much is in the case of medical marijuana patients wishing to assert their Second Amendment rights with respect to having a concealed handguns permit. Now, this is a story coming out of my home state here in Oregon, and joining us by telephone is attorney Leland Berger, who is a member of the NORML Legal Committee. And Lee, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Now, these cases here, you helped to defend on these, and of course, also legal committee member John Lucy IV was also instrumental in these. And, well, let's just inform our listeners a little bit about the background of the cases. We've got Stephen Schwert and a few others here. I'll just let you describe to them what happened here.
Well, sure. It's a little complicated, but it plays out kind of like this. For some time now, Rob Gordon, who's the sheriff in Washington County, which is the Silicon Forest west of Portland, has been trying to assert that he has more control over issuing the concealed handgun licenses than the Oregon legislature has given him. And a couple of years ago, he modified the application form to inquire of people who were either applying or seeking renewal of their or notifying the sheriff of the change of address. On the form, he added questions regarding whether they used any controlled substances, and if this controlled substance was marijuana, how often they used it, and based on that, he denied applications, denied renewals, and revoked concealed handgun licenses. Steve Schwert was one of the people that happened to, in the context of his having submitted a change of address form. And the Oregon statutes provide for a right to petition the circuit court for a review of that decision, and we went to court and we won. And the sheriff, undaunted, tried again this year, and 3 Oregon medical marijuana patients in Washington County petitioned the Washington County Circuit Court for review, and a patient in Jackson County in Medford in southern Oregon petitioned the Jackson County Circuit Court for review, and in both cases the sheriff's positions were the same. Federal law makes it a crime for a, quote, unlawful drug user, close quote, to possess a firearm. And the sheriff took the position that he was preempted by federal law, federal law controlled, and he couldn't, for this reason, issue a concealed handgun license to a medical marijuana patient because it would, in effect, be legalizing their illegal possession of firearms.
Now, so he's referring to then the federal ban on drug users using firearms, but the Oregon law doesn't restrict that in statute?
No, the Oregon law, it isn't actually the use of firearms, it's the simple possession of firearms. In other words, there's a list of people for whom it is a federal crime to possess a firearm. It's a crime for felons to possess firearms, it's a crime for illegal aliens to possess firearms, it's a crime for people who've been convicted of domestic abuse to possess firearms. And I think there's actually in total 8 categories. Under Oregon law, it's illegal for felons to possess firearms, people who have certain people who have been adjudicated mentally ill, and there are some other restrictions on who can possess firearms. But the law is pretty clear that there are, and by pretty clear I mean that the Court of Appeals has consistently ruled, including in cases involving Rob Gordon, the Washington County Sheriff, that the statute which delineates the criteria for an application. In other words, if you apply for the sheriff has the authority to issue concealed handgun licenses. The statute sets out what the criteria are, who a sheriff can issue it to and who a sheriff can't issue it to. And the law is clear that unless the applicant or the person who has a concealed handgun license no longer falls within the category of people that the sheriff's authorized to issue concealed handgun licenses to, then the sheriff can't revoke the permit. And it's not a criteria that a person is using controlled substances or is an unlawful drug user, as that term is used in the federal law.
And there's nothing that requires the Oregon permits to match up with federal law then?
Correct. I mean, the argument, again, the sheriff took the position that federal law controlled, and that's a legal concept called preemption. And what preemption is where the federal law has legislated in a particular area. If a state law is in direct conflict with the federal law, then the federal law controls. Well, the federal law doesn't have nothing to do with authorizing when a sheriff can issue a concealed handgun license.
Okay.
So that's basically our argument. And then the rest of it was that, if the sheriff wants to be able to revoke people, then they should, because they're patients, then they should go to the legislature and get the legislature to amend it.
Well, let's hope not. But
I don't know. I mean, the thing of it is, Russ, if they thought they could successfully do that, they would have done that already.
Right. Good point.
Hello, I'm Casper Leach, host of Time for Him. When our politicians passed the Marijuana Tax Act in 1937, the citizens of the United States had no idea that a new civil war had begun. Now, after more than 7 decades of this war's escalation and spending well over $1 trillion of taxpayers' money, the result has been an arrest record of more than 37 million brothers and sisters for nonviolent drug offenses. Every year, we choose to continue this war. We do so at the cost of well over $69 billion. Add to this, we are building prisons faster than we are building schools. In fact, the prison industry is now one of the fastest growing industries in the United States. We must end this civil war. We can with your help. Please, join LEAP, the Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and become part of the solution to ending the war on drugs. Go to leap.cc and find out how to become a member.
Here at the NORML Daily Audio Stash, we work hard to change our nation's marijuana laws through education and discussion. But we also take time to relax and unwind with an eclectic mix of pod-safe music from many independent artists. We look for music that speaks to the growing truth about cannabis, or music that speaks to broader themes of freedom, liberty, social justice, equality, and protest. To find out more about the artists and download the music you hear on this podcast, just log on to stash.normal.org. And if you'd like to get your music heard by the online cannabis community, just send us an email at stash@normal.org. All right, good stashers, time for a musical break. And for today's musical break, we're bringing back the incredible Carolyn Wonderland. At the beginning of this month, Cannabis Carrie posted a new song from Carolyn Wonderland called Misunderstood. In her notes, Carrie mentioned a previous Carolyn Wonderland song called Annie's Scarlet Letter, which tells the tale of a young woman busted for dealing pot. You can see the video up on our website as well. So I figured that song deserved a play on the stash. So enjoy the compelling songwriting and heartfelt vocals of Carolyn Wonderland. You can learn more about it out at our website at stash.normal.org, where you can also get an MP3 download of this song. It's Carolyn Wonderland and Annie's Scarlet Letter.
Well, my name is Annie. I'm about your daughter's age. I'm happy with my living, earning minimum wage. Last year I had a baby, loved him with all I got. But the bills, they became too much, so I moved a little pot. Now I'm an expatriate in my hometown, and I can't even vote to change the laws that put me down. And I only pray that you fare better. I wear my marijuana leaf like a badge, it's my scarlet letter. And time goes slow here from behind these bars, but I'm not so far away that I can't hear the cars. Driving down a freeway, wishing one of them could give me that short ride downtown where my little boy lives. But I'm an expatriate in my hometown, and I can't even vote to change the laws that put me down. And I only pray that you fare better. I wear my marijuana leaf like a badge, it's my scarlet letter. Put me down, I only pray that you fare better. I wear my marijuana leaf like a badge, it's my scarlet letter. And I don't want you to feel sorry for me, and I ain't on bended knees for your sympathy. I knew it wasn't legal, but was it really so wrong to justify put me down, and I only pray that you fare better. I wear my marijuana leaf like a badge, it's my scarlet letter. Yeah.
It's tough talking to kids about marijuana, especially if you might be a parent who dabbled a time or two in your youth. So to help you out, get your copy of Dr. Mitch Earlywine's latest book, A Parent's Guide to Marijuana. Dr. Earlywine is an associate professor of psychology at the State University of New York at Albany and an expert on the studies concerning marijuana, its effect on health and society, and the methodology behind the statistics. He is a frequent guest here on our daily audio stash. Dr. Earlywine lays it all out without the propaganda and scare tactics that parents know won't work with teenagers. He presents a rational understanding of cannabis, what it is and what it isn't, and why kids shouldn't be using marijuana. You can order today through Amazon.com or check our links at our blog, stash.normal.org. We pick up now with part 2 of my interview with Portland attorney Leland Berger on the rights of medical marijuana patients to have concealed handgun permits in the state of Oregon. So this is Sheriff Rob Gordon in Washington County in Oregon and Sheriff Mike Winters in Jackson County in Oregon that are both in this mindset. Is that the only places in the state of Oregon where we found that problem?
Well, I've spoken with Elmer Dickens, who's the deputy Washington County Counsel, the lawyer for Washington County on the case, because the pleadings that Jackson County Counsel filed were identical to the ones that Elmer had filed. And Elmer says that he has received phone calls from sheriffs in Clackamas County, which is southeast of Portland, Deschutes County, which is Bend in Central Oregon, and elsewhere. But I hadn't heard of any other. I certainly didn't receive calls from any other patients who said that their concealed handgun license had been revoked or their application had been denied because of their medicinal use of therapeutic cannabis.
Now, for these 4 people that we've mentioned in these cases, what is their status right now? Are they allowed to have their concealed weapon at this point?
Well, it's in a little bit of a flux. We haven't. I'm back and forth with Elmer a little about what the final pleading in the case, the judgment looks like. But the judgment will include an order to the sheriff that he reissue these patients' licenses, and once that happens, then they'll have licenses. Except that in both, I know in Washington County, and I believe in Jackson County, that the county commissioners have authorized funds for county council to appeal the decisions.
Okay.
So once the judgment is final, they'll file a notice of appeal, and then we'll file responsive pleadings. And, generally speaking, that process from filing to decision in the Court of Appeals is, around a year or two.
Mm. Now, do you anticipate this going all the way up to the Oregon Supreme Court?
It could. It could, except, Russ, the decisions, the judge in Washington County, Stephen Price, and the judge in Jackson County, presiding judge Mark Shively, are both, neither of them are particularly, liberal judges.
Okay.
And both of them treated the issue as if it were kind of a no-brainer.
Mm.
So it's entirely possible that the Oregon Court of Appeals could affirm the judgments without issuing an opinion. AWOP, that's called, affirmed without opinion. And if they did that, although the county has the right to appeal to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals has to hear the case, review by the Oregon Supreme Court, and for that matter by the United States Supreme Court, is discretionary. They don't have to hear it. So it's hard to say. If the Court of Appeals issued a written decision, especially if they, instead of having just a 3-judge panel decided, but the whole court en banc decided it, it would increase the likelihood that the Supreme Court would consider a petition for review.
Something we'll have to definitely keep our eye on, and watching for the rights of the medical marijuana patients not to be trampled like that. An interesting thing.
Well, that's a good point, Russ, because the sheriffs haven't amended the application to include all of the classifications that the federal law has for who can't possess a firearm. It's clear that this is about the ignorance and prejudice of Oregon sheriffs about medical cannabis patients and firearms. And in that regard, I wanted to share with you and your listeners that the patients that we presented and the rulings from the court made it clear that these are incredibly responsible people, both in terms of how they live their lives, in terms of their therapeutic use of medical cannabis. Cynthia Winters, for example, testifies that she takes tincture before she goes to bed at night. Paul Sansoni, for example, testified that he's developing a strain that has a strong horticulture background. He's trying to develop a strain that doesn't include any THC or minimizes it, because that's not why he's using it. And in terms of their firearm safety, in terms of it being responsible about their possession and use of firearms. Cynthia, for example, testified that she keeps her firearms locked in one place and her medicine locked in another. And so factually, we have a really good record, we think, for appeal. And factually, the county sheriffs think they have a good record for appeal because who testified also admitted that they possess firearms. But, if the U.S. attorney isn't interested in prosecuting these people under the federal law, why don't the sheriffs just leave them alone? And the only answer to that question I can see is that, ignorance and prejudice about what it means to be a medical cannabis patient.
Well, so the law enforcement, they're constantly trumping up whenever there's a drug bust, whenever there's, marijuana bust, regardless of what type, they're always trumping up the amount of guns they also seize. There seems to be this mindset that they can't separate, the medical cannabis and the person, who, of all the people who would need to have a firearm in the home or a concealed firearm to protect themselves, it's people that are growing and using cannabis that has, a huge street value due to prohibition.
Well, you're absolutely right, as far as I'm concerned. The issue always comes back to prohibition. In the absence of prohibition, there wouldn't be any need for patients to secure their medicine.
Yeah.
In that regard, though, one experience that we've had that's been pretty positive in Oregon, and not everywhere, but most places, and for the most part, is in where there have been thefts of medical cannabis. People have been prosecuted. The medicine's been returned to the patient, and law enforcement's certainly doing their job in that respect. And when we talk about law enforcement too, I think we really need to differentiate between the elected officials like the sheriffs who are making policy and the men and women on the street who, for the most part, couldn't care less.
We've been talking with Leland Berger, who's a criminal defense attorney working in Portland, Oregon, and a member of the NORML Legal Committee. Lee, thanks for joining us. Thank you for downloading the NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. We are produced by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. Our executive producer is Alan St. Pierre. Our deputy director is Paul Armentano. Our webmaster is Brian Judy. And web production is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. As always, you can catch up on the latest information about marijuana at www.norml.org. And you can interact and download from our Audio Stash blog at stash.norml.org. For everyone here at NORML, I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville, hoping all your harvests are bountiful and your encounters with law enforcement are non-existent. We leave you today with another cannabis quote, this one from the Institute of Medicine's 1999 report on marijuana. Quote, marijuana is not a completely benign substance. It is a powerful drug with a variety of effects. However, except for the harms associated with smoking, the adverse effects of marijuana use are within the range of effects tolerated for other medications. End quote. That's right, nobody claims that marijuana is harmless, but it's certainly far less harmless than the drugs we allow people to take already. It's time to regulate marijuana use for responsible adults. I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us here on the podcast. We'll be back tomorrow with more news and interviews that you can use in your cannabis community. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.